And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Bud Elliott. That's Tom Finelli. I'm Chip Patterson. It's Indy Day, baby. Group of 5, Independence. We've highlighted a few of the interesting programs from around the country to highlight in a Spring Gleaning episode. Spread the love around. You know, we don't only focus on the Power 5, and we certainly don't only focus on the top 25. I mean, heck, we're digging deep down into some of these conferences. So here's what we got on deck. We will hit Notre Dame, Cincinnati, BYU, Louisiana, Memphis, UCF, Boise State, and Houston. Yes, I hear you. App State, Tulsa, Coastal Carolina. Like we had to make a cutoff. And so if you're very, very passionate and you would like a Spring Gleaning segment for your school and it's not here, leave it in the reviews, baby. 5-star, leave a review, then put in your Spring Gleaning request, and we'll continue doing that in mailbag episodes. If you have not gotten a chance to hear, and again, in the feed, you can go and find them. We've already hit the ACC, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and if your favorite team has not had a Spring Gleaning segment and you would like it, throw it in. We'll make a whole mailbag segment out of it to make sure that that you get what you need. Gentlemen, shall we begin with the Fighting Irish?
Okay.
Is that good? That good? All right. Quick clarification. As always, I'm going to turn to Bud Elliott. I'm sorry to put you on the spot here. Are we Buckner? Tyler Buckner?
Yeah.
Buckner. Okay. This is a good time for me to make sure that I get all of my pronunciation down because I do a lot of reading. Got to admit, I'm not always looking up the YouTubes, and obviously I'm not in charge of talking to these guys or so. But the reason I mention his name, if you are not familiar, he is a very highly rated true freshman quarterback that Notre Dame not only has, but has on campus for the spring. But that's not all when it comes to replacing Ian Book, because we've got former Wisconsin quarterback Jack Cohn. So we've got the elder statesman, the graduate transfer on campus for spring, and we've got Tyler Buckner, the young buck, coming in, early enrollee, and all spring long, who's getting how many reps? Back and forth. That will be something that a lot of people are interested in. I'm not as interested in that, but of course I recognize the significance, especially giving us being a little bit of a Jack Cohn fan podcast, at least going into last season, where we thought that before his injury, he could be someone that was very effective based on his 2019 performance. And then of course, recognizing Buckner's ceiling. Elsewhere that I'm looking at. So Notre Dame has become an offensive line factory. You lose All-Americans. You still got Jarrett Patterson. I mean, he can play at an All-American level. But the questions that I have for that offensive staff are going to be how they shuffle those pieces around, because there's a lot of intriguing talent. Again, we have done a great job at that position at Notre Dame. What are the pieces going to look like? I don't have any single players that I'm looking at to necessarily slide into certain spots, but there does appear to be some uncertainty as to who the 5 is, what positions they are in. But again, it sure seems like cousin Jarrett will be that sort of All-American player there. Big staff hire, Marcus Freeman, one of the top defensive coordinators in the entire country. He's brought over by Brian Kelly from Cincinnati. Offensively, outside of quarterback, still got Kyron Williams, still got Chris Tyree, still got Michael Mayer. Like the idea that we're running with running backs and tight ends and trying to build from sort of the inside out rather than the outside in, that sure seems to be the case. But there is an absence of outside playmakers. I'm not expecting it, at least not to see it this spring. But if we're going to talk about overall success and how Notre Dame stacks up against its peers at the top of the country, certainly something that you would like to see as a Notre Dame fan. So for the Fighting Irish, they are back to their independent ways. ACC schedule. Thanks. Enjoyed it. Made it to the ACC title game. Took down Clemson, but now we're going to open things up again. How are we feeling about the Fighting Irish, and where are our eyes and ears for spring practice?
I think this is a really interesting season for Notre Dame. especially with what we've seen the program doing in the last few years with its recruiting and how it's stepped up, because we've seen in the past in the Brian Kelly era that they had great seasons and then they would have kind of like a reset year, or maybe sometimes even two, and then they would get back to being like 10 wins. Like they had they went to the national title game in 2012. They won 9 games, I think, in 2013. Then they had an 8-5 season. Then they jumped back up to 10. Then they dropped to 4-8, and ever since then they've had 4 straight 10-win seasons at least. But like we look at the returning production rankings, like you mentioned all the stuff that they lose. Ian Book obviously is a big part of that, but in Connolly's returning production rankings, they're 123rd nationally. Like they lost a lot from that team last year at a lot of key spots, and there's a lot to replace. Obviously, the QB competition is huge, but I want to see, because like this is something we talked about the last couple of years about how they've stepped up on the recruiting to kind of become more of a program that could compete with the elite to get to the college football playoff and maybe win some games and maybe win a national title. So if you're truly at that point, if the way you've been recruiting to get to that point, I feel like this is our first litmus test of how successful Notre Dame's new approach and plan has been. Because if they can replace everything that they lose from that team last season and still come out and know they're not playing an ACC schedule this year, but they're still playing a pretty difficult schedule and win 10 games and 11 games and be in the playoff picture, I think that's huge. But that's more of a macro look at it. Micro level, I was high on Jack Cohn at Wisconsin. I thought he was capable of doing more than Wisconsin asked. But I also kind of looked at that from the context of Wisconsin, of being a Wisconsin quarterback, of what you're asked to do at Wisconsin. At Notre Dame, I don't know if Jack Cohn kind of meshes with what I think Notre Dame sees itself trying to be. And I don't know if I think he might start the season as a starter, but I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, you're hoping Buckner plays so well this spring and this summer and fall that at some point he takes that job over. But so that's going to be interesting to me. But I also think you touched on it a bit too, Chip. The receiver position, yes, they've got Kyron Williams back. Yes, they've got Michael Meyer back. They've got their tight ends, their big behemoths. But somebody needs to emerge on that offense as an outside perimeter threat down the field. Until they have that, it's going to be very difficult for them to really truly compete with the best, programs in the country. So will somebody emerge there finally this year? They thought they had that last year with Kevin Austin. He got hurt, and now hopefully he's healthy. He's able to stay on the field this year and become that guy, because somebody needs to step up and take on that role if this Notre Dame offense is, especially without Ian Book, is going to really take that step forward.
I think Tom hit on something pretty important here with the lack of the outside receiver threat. And when you look at Bill's returning production numbers, look, the projection systems are always going to be better than the humans working without the numbers, right? But the optimal strategy is to use the numbers and then, make some human adjustments that make logical sense. And one of the ones that I would make for this team is that I would discount the production lost from the receiver position, because the guys that they lost primarily were dudes who were backups entering the season, right? Not only to Tom's point, Kevin Austin, right, who they certainly missed quite a bit, and Kevin, physically is pretty freaky. They also were missing Braden Lindsey, who played. I mean, Lindsey and Kevin Austin combined for 7-8 catches on the year. I mean, they were probably expecting both those guys to be 35, 45 catch players apiece. So that was a significant blow to the Irish. And it's something that, I know we talked about, I'm sure you guys did too at CBS. Look, when it comes for them to play a really, really elite team, they don't have it. And it's not to say they didn't recruit it, but they don't have it on the field at the minute because their two guys they were counting on were hurt. So that's kind of the first point I would make. I think there's a reason for optimism with this team based on some explosiveness returning there on the outside, or at least some assumed explosiveness. They're not exactly proven studs, but we think they're pretty good. And they were going to start for the Irish, before they got hurt. The other thing I would point to here that I think could help them avoid a massive drop off is let's take a look at their win expectancy from their games last year. They didn't just go, they didn't just win or lose just 2 games. They were completely dominant against everybody for the most part who was not Clemson or Alabama, right? 83% over Duke, 100% USF, 99% Florida State, 100% Pitt, 100% Georgia Tech, 97 Boston College, 99 UNC, 99 Syracuse. Now, Louisville was weird. I'll grant you that. The wind was blowing so bad that day they couldn't throw the ball, and I think Brian Kelly just said, "Screw it! Like we're just going to run and win this thing." I don't think he thought they would win 12-7, but that's what.
Oh no,
did.
that was 1916, baby. Like that was football from another era.
Yeah.
Like
No, that
I was waiting
like
for you.
1-for-5 in the red zone that day.
What was the win expectancy then? Because I can tell you, watching it, I never thought Louisville was going to win. The score suggested that Louisville was in that game, and I don't know if once I really thought the Cards were going to do anything.
I thought the only chance was if like some of these throws were hitting the goalpost, right? Like the wind was so crazy. Okay, this is kind of weird. Like there could be some strange things happen due to the wind. But my overarching point here is like, let's say that Notre Dame does drop down. Last year, the metrics saw them as the 16th best team in the country. The rankings saw them, far higher. Let's say they still play as a top 25 level team or even a top 15 level team, perhaps. The thing is, like, if they drop down some, they're still going to be a pretty significant favorite in almost all their games. So, like, yes, you'll still lose to the Clemsons or Bamas if you meet them, most likely, given how much you lost off last year's roster. But I don't think that the gap is narrowed that much against the other teams on the Irish's schedule. And I'm interested to see if they can answer some of those questions in spring that Tom brought up. But I still have fairly high hopes for this football team.
Yeah, because honestly, if you look at their schedule right now, based on what we know, I don't know what game right now they wouldn't be favored in. Like maybe in the opener against Florida State on the road, but
I still think they'll be favored. If you give me Notre Dame as a dog, I'm unloading on that.
Maybe Wisconsin at Soldier Field. That would be a game where they're not favored, but
is that early in the year?
Yeah, that's in the end of September.
Yeah, I would have Wisconsin as a favorite over Notre Dame at this point, just in my head.
They get Cincinnati at home, so they should be favored there. They get USC at home, probably favored. North Carolina at home, they're probably favored. Other than that, everything else looks like they're clearly favored against other opponents.
I mean, this team plays to its potential. I think, it doesn't have like a 5-7, 6-6 type floor. It probably has like an 8-4 type floor and, a 10-2, 11-1 type ceiling within that range.
The Cincinnati Bearcats were undefeated. They had it rolling. They were left out. They were snubbed. They got no love from the selection committee. And they played Georgia pretty tight all the way down to the end, ended up taking their only loss on the season. 6-0 in AAC play, 9-1 overall after that Peach Bowl loss to the Bulldogs. And like Luke Fickell has created through performance and recruiting a pretty consistent program here. Now, as we look into spring practice, here's what I'm excited about. So the 2020 recruiting class was like a new high level for the Bearcats. Like, wow, they're really doing it. They exceeded that with 2021. Now, of course, not everybody from 2021 recruiting class is going to be a factor here in the spring practice. But the idea being some of these younger players, who are we going to see that might be able to surprise us? Who's going to be the new name? Because this is a group that brings back a lot of players at key positions from last year's team. Only 7 starters on the defensive side of the ball, but the big changeover, you lose Marcus Freeman, as we mentioned, to Notre Dame. Mike Tressel takes over as the new defensive coordinator. They had one of the best secondaries in the country. They've got some key pieces to replace there. All of that's important. The defensive line depth is really, really good right now. They also welcome in a transfer from Virginia. I mean, I'm counting, like, if we're going to look at the defensive line, if you go Sanders, Van, Brooks, Brown, Taylor, Walnut Hills from Virginia, you've got Jawan Briggs. Like, there's a lot of options. You can fill out a 2 deep, and I'm not really sure what the order is, but seeing how Mike Tressel, like what his scheme even is going to be and how that uses the defensive line is all very interesting. And of course, Luke Fickell with his own background, I'm sure is still going to want to have his fingerprints on that. Desmond Ritter's still here. All right. I can give you a 3 or 4 game sample size if I cherry pick games and just show you the statistics. And you're going to think that Desmond Ritter is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. But if I have you watch an entire season of Cincinnati football, I don't think you come away with that same expectation. Now, he's been banged up and he's dealt with injuries and he's played through a lot of injuries. So while Desmond Ridder is not necessarily my big question I do have some question about the quarterback depth. Ben Bryant has been a somewhat reliable, not a very high ceiling player, but a reliable backup for Ritter through the last couple seasons. He is transferred to Eastern Michigan. So when you have a player with a history like Desmond Ritter, I do think you want to make sure that you've got some options. Should he get banged up? Should he miss a series, a quarter, a half, or entire game or games? So the quarterback depth. And then here's another thing from a notepad right here. Desmond Ritter, I did not necessarily always look at as a truly dynamic, top of the conference passing threat, but I also haven't always been wowed by what they had at wide receiver. They bring back Alec Pierce, Michael Young Jr., Trey Tucker, Jordan Jones, but they lost Ja'Shawn Jackson to the transfer portal. So is the passing attack intimidating? Can they get a full season of health out of Desmond Ritter? And the defensive changes, all interesting for a team that will once again, after going 6-0 undefeated in AAC play, will begin this season as the favorite. Betting favorite, I don't know. But I think that you got to call them the favorite to win the AAC.
They're my favorite to win the AAC. I think you look at it, this team, you mentioned Desmond Ritter. I do think that he kind of got off to it. I wasn't very high on Ritter in 2019. Thought he got off to a slow start last season, which was kind of just me confirming. I was like, yeah, no, I just don't see it. This is a team that's really good defensively. They need a better QB. But I feel like from about the Memphis game on, he kind of figured things out and he started playing really well. Like he had 4 interceptions in their first 4 games, but then he had 2 interceptions in the last 6. And against Georgia, if you look at his numbers, the numbers weren't great. He only threw for 200 yards. He only averaged 5.6 yards per attempt, but he's doing that against Georgia. And he didn't turn the ball over. And that's, to a good side. A lot of teams have bad days against that Georgia defense last year. It was one of the best defenses in the country. And Cincinnati was in position to win that game. So I look at that situation where it's like their quarterback is not playing particularly great, and they're nearly knocking off Georgia in a bowl game. To me, I know it was a loss, but as far as moral victories go, I felt like that was kind of a moral win for Cincinnati going forward, and probably a confidence booster for that program going forward and going back into the AAC this year, where I do think that they're going to be the best team in the conference. And I really don't we're going to get to more teams here later from the AAC, but when I'm breaking down the conference, I just have so much more confidence in this Bearcats team and what they have. And on the defensive side, Myjai Sanders and that defensive line, and the secondary loses some guys, but they're still, it was a very well-coached defense. And I know Marcus Freeman has left for Notre Dame. And I think that's not something you can ignore, because I think Marcus Freeman's an excellent defensive coordinator. But I do think Luke Fickell's a very good defensive coordinator and understands football. And I think Tressel can come in there and they'll be just fine on the defensive side of the ball. So I just see this team's floor when I look at them compared to what they're playing. Okay, they've got a couple really difficult non-conference games. They got Indiana and they've got Notre Dame, both on the road. They could lose both those games. They could win both those games. But when I look in the conference, I really don't see the team that I'm like, okay, that's where they're going to run into trouble. I feel like this is a team that's probably going to cruise through conference play and is going to reach the conference title game and is going to be that group of 5 New Year's 6 team we're talking about all season, barring injuries. I just don't see a whole lot of bad paths for this team in 2021.
I think Tom really nailed it there. To me, one thing that stands out about Cincinnati is just the inability for opponents to block them. Right? They just have a different level of player along the defensive line, and they lost some guys, but they returned the majority, of those guys. I think Mike made 30 something havoc plays alone. Right. And just most teams in that league don't have the offensive line that can handle Cincinnati. And you see it on a week-to-week basis. And when you combine that with the fact they're well coached, that obviously produces great results like we've seen. I have a couple questions about this team. Number one, do you know what team was dead last in the country in havoc rate allowed?
Was it Cincy?
Yeah. Does that surprise you? It surprises me a little bit.
It does.
Yeah. 18.3% havoc rate allowed. That's a cause for concern. That could be potentially an indicator that things weren't quite as good offensively as they looked, on the scoreboard. Certainly their defense gave them some tremendous field position in a lot of their games, on the year. I also am a little bit concerned about their two things. Like, I thought their short passing game last year was really nice. They didn't throw the ball deep very well, at least not on a consistent basis. And then offensively, they would hit explosive runs, but they put themselves behind the chains an awful lot. They were not consistently good at running the football. Like their median run was not very good, right? It's sort of the 2019 Florida problem where their yards per carry looked great, but then you realize they had a bunch of like 70, 80, 90-yard runs, and their consistent carry was not great. So it put them in a lot of negative leverage situations, on those preceding, second and third downs. So I guess those are my concerns, but ultimately I don't have that many concerns for this team. I think this is going to be another very good team. And I used to really rag on Ritter. I didn't think he was worth the damn. And I don't think he's great now, but he's certainly a lot better than I thought he used to be.
And Cincinnati fans will scream till their face is blue that the 2019 season, he was hurt all year. You don't know. He was playing through injury all year. It's like, yeah, well,
his numbers look like it.
yeah, exactly.
By the way, backup quarterback wise, their highest rated player in their 2020 class was Evan Prater, quarterback who we had in the top 200. So there's certainly talent on that roster behind Ritter.
Good note. And just real quick, so for the listeners, let me play the dummy here. And actually, you know what? Maybe I am the dummy here. So the Havoc plays are sacks, quarterback hurries, fumbles, and interceptions.
Tackles for
no
loss.
hurries. Tackles for loss.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the Havoc percentage would be the percentage of plays that end with one of those disruptive stats.
There's also a decent correlation there to turnovers, right? Like, it's hard to predict turnovers, but like they're more likely to come on Havoc plays. You want to allow very few Havoc plays. Obviously, you don't want to have a whole lot of Havoc in your offense,
sure.
And you want to create a lot of them on defense. So defensively, Cincinnati 5th in the country at creating them. So that tracks.
Their games were very havoc-y.
Yeah. 5th in the country defense, and then you said dead last.
Yeah,
in offense. Goodness gracious. Well, we've given y'all a lot of heads up whenever there's something juicy on All Things Covered. Our friends in the CBS Sports Podcast Network, All Things Covered, hosted by Patrick Peterson and Bryant McFadden. Patrick Peterson and BMAC, they've got JC Horn on the show this week, and it's a very interesting conversation. There are a few details that I think our listeners would love, including what it was like in the recruiting process. Now, JC Horn originally committed to Tennessee. Then when Butch Jones got fired, everything changed for him. Ended up at South Carolina. He had to step in as a starter as a freshman. And that third game of his career starting as a freshman, boy, there's a real welcome to the SEC kind of moment. He's discusses the draft process, deciding to opt out in the season. He says a lot of people don't realize it had to do with family health issues due to COVID. He explains that and more with Pat and BMAC. Again, it is All Things Covered with Patrick Peterson and Brian McFadden. Former South Carolina cornerback JC Horn, a very interesting NFL prospect. His dad was in the NFL. A lot of good takes from him. So check him out. He thinks he's the best cornerback and best defender in the class. We will see where he lands. JC Horn on All Things Covered with Patrick Peterson and Brian McFadden. Download it wherever you get your podcast. BYU went 11-1. Anyone, anywhere. Write it on the headband, baby. Let's go. As we look ahead to Kalani Sitake's group in the upcoming season, there is a lot to replace, and it is not limited to Zach Wilson, who does appear to be on his way to a very high pick in the NFL draft. But let's start there. Quarterback. Baylor Romney was the primary backup for Wilson, so he will be considered one of the top candidates to replace him. Jaron Hall is another name that I would mention. All this is very significant, especially because here, offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes, he gone, went to Baylor. And it wasn't just him. The offensive line coach went too. And it's not just them. 3 key offensive linemen all declared for the NFL draft. Now, Sataki decided that he was going to stay in-house, promoted Aaron Roderick from quarterback coach to offensive coordinator. But as we look at the way that, like, have y'all seen the Zach Wilson highlights? Well, we all watched him, but it's like, man, he made awesome throws and no one was within 10 yards of him as he made the throw. It's like, man, he rolled out, but nobody was in his face. This offensive line was awesome. We're losing 3 NFL players and the offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator. It's not just quarterback. There's a lot to be concerned there for BYU. So where are y'all's thoughts with the Cougars here in spring practice?
It's a whole new team. I mean, I think it's safe to say you can hold this against me if you want. BYU's not going 11-1 this year. Like, you mentioned all the losses. You're losing Zach Wilson, who might be the second pick in the NFL draft, the way things are going. And I just don't think BYU is a program that is in a condition where they could lose that guy and just expect to keep going at the same rate that they were last year. I think last year's team was a very special BYU team in a special situation with, frankly, a schedule that wasn't the most challenging, and certainly not as challenging as the one they're going to face this year. So you're losing him, you're losing your offensive coordinator, you're losing a whole bunch of people on offense and defense. We look at Connolly's returning production rankings of the 127 teams that played last year. BYU ranks 127th in returning production for 2021. So for me this spring, there's nowhere not to look as far as trying to, like, what's interesting to me this spring. Well, let me look at the quarterback situation. Let me look at the offensive line. Let me look at the defensive line. Let me look in the secondary. Let me look on the sidelines at the coaching staffs who are now new coaches in new spots trying to figure this all out at the same time. This is like a spring mixer more than a spring practice to me, where everybody's going to be getting to know each other. And I think that it's going to be really important for this team heading into the summer and fall, because again, they're not going to go 11-1. That doesn't mean I sit here and I'm saying they're going to go 5-7 or 4-8. I still think they're BYU. They're going to be pretty good. They do.
Tom Fornelli says BYU will go 5-7 or 4-8. Like, clip that.
Let's go aggregate that.
But like they have a typical, somewhat, a Power 5 heavy schedule. Like BYU does that. They start with Arizona, then they get Utah and Arizona State. So they're literally opening their season with 3 Pac-12 teams. They get USF, they get Utah State, Boise State. Then they've got Baylor, Washington State, Virginia, Idaho State, Georgia Southern, USC. They play a more difficult schedule in a typical year than some Power 5 teams do, if we're being honest. So it's going to be a difficult situation for them to maintain the kind of success that they had last year. So I think this is going to be a reset year, but I think that this spring is going to be very important for the Cougars to establish roles and get people into the new offenses, into the new defenses, knowing what their route role is, knowing who's capable of doing what, just figuring all that crap out is what they have to do in 15 practices?
So is this your favorite for the team that is likely to have the greatest drop off in wins from last year to this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so too. Not like to the extent where I would take it over the field, because somebody else may do it, but if I had to pick one team, it's probably them.
Well, 11 is a high,
right.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean 11 to 4 or 5, they could be okay, and we could have a 6-win delta.
Like if we look at the last AP poll of the season last year, and it's like pick the one team in these rankings that you're the most confident won't finish next season in the top 25, it's this team.
Yeah, I would agree. They did so many things well last year, but I am struck. Remember when we talked about Northwestern and how many guys they were losing to the draft and how long it had been since they had multiple first round picks, but also, just multiple top 100 picks and whatnot. I think you have a similar thing going on here with BYU. When these teams in G5 teams, and I know BYU is an Indy, but in my mind, they're a little more of a G5 than they are P5. Not by they're a little closer than some are, but when they lose this amount of top level talent, top level experience, that normally hurts. When they lose a quarterback, right, who's going to go high in the NFL draft, that is almost always a really big deal. And I don't care how much you like Baylor Romney. I mean, the odds that they have another Zach Wilson ready to go are very low, right? Not to mention Romney's numbers last year were not great. I mean, 6.4 per attempt adjusted, 68% completions is fine, but again, not very far downfield. And I think that this is a team that is particularly hurt with the rest of the country bringing back so much experience, right? They might be able to go, I don't know, 8-4, 9-3 in a given year losing this. But this year, I think it makes it more punitive to lose as much as they did. It'll still be a good team, I think. Just this could be one of those teams that we're betting on in November because they have a losing record entering the month, and we're like, they're a little bit better than they thought. You know, it took a little while for them to gel. I'm back in BYU down the stretch type thing. Maybe they'll get to a bowl. That's kind of my read early on.
I do want to make one amendment. Not top 25, but top teams that finished in the top 15 last year to finish unranked. Because if you look at the bottom of the AP poll last year, you know, you got Buffalo, San Jose State, Ball State. There's a good chance they won't finish ranked either.
I thought about that too. When I was mentioning all those teams at the beginning, I was like San Jose State, Ball State, you know, there's a lot of teams out there that Tulsa, you know, we'll see. If you want spring gleaning on your team, put it in the mailbag. We'll put it together in a future mailbag episode. Hey, Cover 3 listeners, baseball season is here. If you want to dominate your fantasy baseball leagues, then you should be listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Stay up to date with all the latest news, waiver wire advice, and pitchers to stream in just 5 minutes or less. Download and follow anywhere you listen to this podcast. And CBS Sports is your home. Do-do-do, ding, 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 ding. As always, to watch DJ, Brooks, Rory, and all the action unfold at Augusta. Whether you're looking to watch on the range, just watching Bryson contort his body at ridiculous speeds as Vijay Singh laughs along, featured groups where some of these stellar combinations, I mean, there's some oil and water groups out here. I mean, and just to be able to watch these guys interact together is going to be fantastic, as well as, you know, star power that you're going to want to see and being able to catch them all. Feature group coverage is fantastic. Amen Corner. Those 3 iconic holes, see the entire field come through them. 15 and 16, the risk reward. Come see everyone go through. 16, aka Rosebud. No par 3 has more hole-in-ones in Masters history than number 16. There's a camera on it so you can see everyone come through. All 4 rounds and even the CBS Sports broadcast over the weekend. All that stuff. It's all available on CBSSports.com, the CBS Sports mobile app, and Paramount Plus. Pimento cheese sandwich not included, but we're working on that for next year. Check it out. Everything you could need from the Masters. You can watch it on CBSSports.com, CBS Sports mobile app, and Paramount Plus. Coming up on the other side, one of the top names from the coaching carousel decided to stay put. Maybe it's because of everybody else that was staying put. We'll get into that and more next. Billy Napier, hot coaching candidate. You know, we had South Carolina open up. We had Auburn open up. You know, Tennessee was looking for a new head coach. But Billy Napier, he has a loaded team. Coming back from a 10-1 season, they were 7-1 in conference play. They finally were able to break through in a big way. This Ragin' Cajuns team, they've like Levi Lewis is back for his 5th year, but it is just all over the roster. The returning production is fantastic. And so I don't have any personnel questions. Now I'm absolutely willing to be proven wrong. I ran into a couple of paywalls that kept me from getting all the information that I wanted to get, but I still know from my own notes of this team last season and what I know about who is coming back, this is going to be a daggum good football team. So, you know, the conversation that I was able to gather from some of the media availabilities that the players and the coaches have had is that, you know, they are excited about using this spring to be able to just continue to build. They feel like throughout the summer, they were able to make up some of what they lost during spring practice, where they lost spring because of the pandemic. And so now it's almost like rejuvenating them and giving them a fresh start to a season. So all the same names for the most part are in place. A lot of new attitude and new spirit around the group. Got to be exciting if you're a Ragin' Cajuns fan. What, if any, kind of questions do we have about this team here in spring practice?
do they need it? I mean, it's like seriously, they have so many guys back from last year's team that I don't know that there's really any positions that'll truly be up for grabs, but obviously they need it. You could use it. But this is a team that my only real question going in was, it's not even a spring question. It's just about this team in 2021 because Billy Napier's back. Like you said, Chip, he was, I don't know how many quote unquote real true offers he had from Power 5 schools, but he was definitely a candidate of interest at a lot of bigger jobs in Louisiana, and he turned them down. And you have to think it was partially because he knows what he has coming back this year. Maybe he just didn't like the fits, the people that were offering him the jobs. But this is going to be a really good team in the Sun Belt, and this has to be your favorite in the Sun Belt. And I'm looking at their schedule in 2021, and their very first game of the season is at Texas. Steve Sarkisian's first game at Texas against a very good Louisiana team that has proven is capable of knocking off Big 12 teams just last year. So, I don't think it's insane to think that this Cajuns team, with the amount of experience it has, can come back, start the year with a win over Texas, and then if Texas goes on to have a good season, suddenly it's got that kind of resume win where maybe it's in the real conversation for a New Year's Six spot, which it's always difficult in the Sun Belt because the Sun Belt's just not going to get the kind of, respect from the committee that you need to reach that spot. Like we saw last year with Coastal. Coastal kept winning games, and Coastal was never really ranked all that high by the playoff committee, and they never really took it all that seriously. But if this is a Cajuns team that had the season it had last year and is able to pick up a win against Texas and then run roughshod through the Sun Belt like I think it's capable of doing, maybe it's not that crazy if Cincinnati has a couple losses, if Boise State or the Mountain West champion has a couple losses, that we could see the Cajuns playing a New Year's Six game.
And I'm unmuted. Cool.
Yeah, there you go.
I think it's possible, right? I
thought you went Barton on us. I thought you just internet went away.
Oh man. I think it's really possible this team can take another step. They improved in a lot of areas last year. The run game was still awesome. The passing game got better. I think most impressively, they just did not allow big plays through the air, and their entire secondary is back. I think their run defense, which was an area that they dealt with a lot of injuries and COVID last year along the defensive front. I mean, there were weeks where it was well, who the hell are these guys starting for them? And yet they still managed, to win 10 games, maybe lucky in a couple of those games. But I do think this year they should be able to surpass their win total. They also get Jamal Bell back, the receiver for them, who's pretty explosive. He missed a lot of 2020. So I'm thinking there's a pretty good chance that this team can give Texas a run.
Yeah. I mean, Cajuns plus the points right now.
Yeah. And unless they get, too popular, and then I'm going to have to back Sark, I guess. But with Billy Napier, it's interesting to me, what kind of offers did he have? But also, did he want those jobs? Billy Napier's a guy that's coaching the SEC at a lot of different stops and at Clemson, and, probably has a pretty understanding of what jobs are sort of dead end type jobs and what jobs have expectations and what jobs will let you bring your the staff you want to bring and which ones won't. Auburn.
Allegedly being forced into
allegedly, and they end up with Mike Bobo as their OC. So I'm going to go ahead and allegedly buy that, given that I have questions as to whether Harsin actually wanted him to be their OC. You know what? He might just look like an absolute genius if he waits his way out 2 years in a row into the LSU job. It's right down the road. He's recruited the state well, recruits the Southeast extremely well. Exciting offense, improved defense, a lot of SEC experience, head coaching experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It could happen.
So my understanding is that Napier has the notebook, and I say the notebook not to mean a literal notebook, but how I want every aspect of this building to be run. How I want to divide the power, how I want to divide the assignments, how we want to commit our resources. And I mean, that comes from Saban. And if he cannot have that kind of control, then he's not interested, because he believes that the notebook is the key to success. And he's had very little experience during his short time at Louisiana to suggest that it is not a way to very quickly level up and improve a football program. So Like even the LSU discussion, if LSU's administration doesn't give him that kind of opportunity, then he might even say no to that one.
That's possible.
I mean, it's like this. He's a stud. What if he's waiting out Tuscaloosa?
Maybe.
That's a dangerous game. Like, do you guys think that what he's doing here at Louisiana is like, it's risky to keep trying to stay at this level at a G5?
Yes.
Your variance year to year at a G5 is greater. It just is.
Yeah. I think that whether it's LSU or somewhere, I feel like if the Cajuns have the kind of season I'm anticipating them having in 2021, I think that he almost kind of has to make the jump somewhere, because once they lose all that, because I'm sure they're going to lose a ton off the 2021 team, that's where you kind of enter the G5 roulette, where, you cycle back. So I don't think if they win the conference again and they're in consideration for a New Year's 6 spot, his star as a G5 coach won't get any higher. I mean, it's already really high. He's already getting interest from SEC jobs. He's getting, from real legit Power 5 gigs.
We've seen coaches too at G5s try to wait it out too long, and they think that like they're building something super sustainable, and they're not always wrong, but sometimes they definitely are wrong. It's, oh man, that he could have had this job, he could have had that job, and now he's stuck.
Yeah, when we say the remember when so-and-so was a candidate for this job, and then we're talking about 3 years later, and we're like, wow, that was a miss on that one. Yeah, interesting. Memphis, Ryan Silverfield, year one, tough, as we've mentioned for so many of these first-year coaches. And the thing that is, I think, difficult is trying to connect where we saw Memphis as we got used to it competing for American Athletic Conference championships, and then the kind of resetting our expectations, because I think we saw a little bit of a step back last year, and I don't see a lot of signs that we're just all of a sudden going to bounce right back up. And that was a good season. They went 5-3 in conference play, 8-3 overall, and man, they were hurt by the fact that Kenneth Gainwell, one of the best running backs and all-purpose players in the entire country, opted out. Now, Rodriguez Clark ended up leading the team in rushing. He is back along with Asa Martin, that is of Auburn and Miami fame, I guess you could say, before he arrived with the Tigers. Brady White is gone. They've got Grant Gunnell from Arizona, Peter Parrish from LSU, a couple of transfers that will be competing this spring for that starting job. Defensively, hello, Mike McIntyre. Good to see you again. Didn't have much time to put together the kind of defensive plan install. We'll see if that side of the ball takes a step forward. This feels like a Memphis program looking at the personnel, taking into consideration, all the moving pieces. It seems like the floor is still, I don't know, like the floor is still a bowl game. And, considering all the ways that the American Athletic Conference has these teams that are fighting to move up in the pecking order, those teams that we've sort of gotten like pinned at the top of the standings, a floor of a bowl game is pretty good. But I don't know if this is a season where I'm going in with the kind of expectations that they will be pushing a Cincinnati or otherwise for the conference title. So I don't know where y'all are at with Memphis, but this is a readjust my expectation year, because after 12 years of Brady White and the success of Mike Norvell and sort of where Memphis had gotten, where it was almost like double-digit wins, they got a New Year's 6 bowl appearance. I think it's time that we understand that they're not going to be the dregs of college football that they were a long time ago, but they're also not necessarily going to be New Year's 6. And so we're trying to find that happy medium right now.
I'm happy you brought it up, because I thought you were just going to glance over Brady White's 2 decades as a college football quarterback there for a minute. Now they're a good team. I don't think they're Cincinnati. Like I said earlier when we were talking about the Bearcats, I really do think that Bearcats team is kind of a level above everybody else in that conference this season. But I do think Memphis is right there as the team that Cincinnati could be playing in the conference title game. I do think that it's right there with UCF as the number 2 team, and I think it has that capability. They've recruited well with rankings context within the AAC. I think that they've got talent. They're a good team. I think that the interesting thing to me this spring will be the quarterback competition, because with Brady White leaving, you've got Grant Cannell coming in, a transfer from Arizona. You have Peter Parrish, who was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school that they recruited, who is also in the competition. And it's probably going to be a battle between those two. And I think that, Brady White, we made fun of him a lot because he was in college forever. But the truth is, while he wasn't elite, he wasn't great. He did what they wanted to do in that Memphis offense, and he did a decent enough job that Memphis was able to win a lot of games. So it's going to be interesting to see if these guys can live up to what Brady White was able to do, or if they can improve upon it, because I do think that if they do want to compete with the Bearcats this year for a conference title, they need to improve at the quarterback spot. They need to see somebody take a step forward. And based on what I've seen, and again, this is always that kind of situation where when you've seen a guy compared to with the mystery box guy you haven't seen, you always kind of go to the mystery box because you know what Grant Cannell is. So I feel like Peter Parrish is somebody who maybe could take him there, because from what I saw of Grant Cannell in Arizona, I was never truly incredibly impressed by anything. But again, that was Arizona. And as we talked about on the Pac-12 show the other day, wasn't a great situation going on there. So it's hard to know if we should hold that against him. Maybe this is a much better spot for him going forward with his college career, and he could take that step forward. But I think that, like you said, Chip, the floor for this Memphis team is probably 4 losses, maybe 5 if a lot goes wrong. They're going to a bowl game. They're going to be competitive within the conference.
I'm interested to see what Coach Ryan Silverfield does with Peter Parrish, right? Like Parrish is a player who I remember as a recruit, a lot of schools were looking at as an athlete, right? But he was a high school quarterback. And then he ended up having a really strong camp season, followed up by a nice senior season in high school, if I recall, throwing the football. And that combined with his legs, he could be a really dynamic playmaker for them at Memphis. If they go with Cannell, I agree with Tom. I've not been, super impressed. He was a guy as a recruit who emerged very early. I know a lot of good coaches were on him early on. I know Jimbo liked him a whole lot, early on as well, like as a freshman in high school, just based on seeing him at FSU's camp at the time. But I don't think he really improved as a recruit as much as some other kids did on the same timeline. But they've recruited fairly well for the league, and I just think this team is. I think Chip's right. Like 8-4 is probably the floor here. I mean, they still have some good playmakers. They have options. Defensively, I thought they actually did some decent things up front. My real key to the season this year for Memphis is avoid the party bus. I mean, they missed a whole month. I mean, their game was on September 5th. Yes. They didn't play again till October 3rd, and they got their they didn't play very well in that game.
I think go back to Cannell. He's just somebody that looks like a quarterback because he's big. He's got a big arm, and it's like, oh yeah, that's our quarterback. But yeah, I don't think there's been a whole lot of growth with what he's been able to do with it. But maybe you get him in the right offense, get him with the right coaching, bang, it pops. Maybe he is Brady White because they are similar builds. I think Cannell's probably got a stronger arm than White did. So I could see why that alone, even if Peter Parrish doesn't turn out to be anything that's capable of winning the starting job, I can't see Cannell being an improvement on White.
Yeah, I really don't think Brady White was that good. Like I know I don't know. I'm not enamored with Brady White as a passer.
I respect my elders, so I would never say that on the show.
UCF went 5-3 last year. Good enough to get Josh Heupel the job at Tennessee. 6-4 overall. And Gus Malzahn arrives to take over this Knights program. I kind of think that with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, with Gus Malzahn there, like are the Knights going to be a favorite in most conference games that they play? I would assume so. Like I am looking at UCF as a potential bounce back team, considering that last year's 5-3 conference record, 6-4 overall record is going to be something that can be improved on from a winning percentage. So where are the questions for Gus Malzahn here in year one, spring one with the Knights?
I mean, thankfully, Gus brings that defensive prowess that he had at Auburn, putting together those great defenses, because I think UCF's defense needs to take a step forward. That was like the one thing from that bowl game against BYU. They just got ripped apart. And I think that needs to take a step forward this year. They do lose, I think, quite a bit from that defense. And I think that this is a situation where maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, some new blood stepping in and taking over, but I mean, I think UCF is a talented roster. It's a talented team. And I think that Gus is a good fit for what UCF has on the roster and where they want to go. But I don't think this is a UCF team that's going to win the conference this year. I think that Gus is probably, I think that Dillon Gabriel can work in Gus's offense. I think that Dillon Gabriel, I think in a way, Gus has to let Dillon Gabriel do things that he didn't really let some of his Auburn QBs do. Like, I think that he's got to open some stuff up as far as what he wants his offense to be with his quarterback and give Gabriel a little bit more freedom, because I do think that he's got an excellent arm, particularly downfield. And I think that that's something that they need to take advantage of for that offense to be at full capacity. So I think that's going to be interesting, seeing how Gabriel fits in Gus's offense this spring and them trying to get, in mesh together and working together there. And I think that's going to be the thing that I'm most focused on, as well as just some improvement, particularly on the defensive front. I just did not feel like when I watched UCF last year that there was a whole lot up there, that, they didn't win a whole lot of battles based on what I saw. And I think that they need to start winning battles, because the way that team recruits in relation, with where it's located within its conference, within that state, I feel like UCF should have a better defensive front than it had last year. That's just, maybe that's not fair, but that's just how I feel. And I think that I want to see that kind of improvement.
I think the key word there, Tom, is should.
Yeah.
Right? Like, UCF fans are going to look back on the Josh Heupel tenure and say, damn, that was a huge missed opportunity. Like, we were constantly in the national headlines. We were going 12-0 or 11-1, 10-2, and we didn't recruit the state of Florida for worth a damn. They should, in theory, be better on the defensive line, but in practice, they didn't sign studs. They weren't landing kids who, I don't think they're going to beat out, Miami or Florida State or Florida for anybody anytime soon. And they basically never, ever do. But they should have beaten out kids, who liked, Purdue and Minnesota and maybe NC State once in a while, or, teams sort of in that range. And they simply didn't. Really never on defense. And so that's a concern that is continuing. I definitely think UCF will recruit a whole lot better under Gus, and he'll have some playing time to sell, I would think, because Heupel's recruiting at UCF was quite disappointing. My concern, I'm going to go to the other side of the ball, if I can for a minute. Man, they lose a ton at receiver, right? Like, I'm looking at this. Marlon Williams is listed as gone, Trey Nixon, Jacob Harris, and then also Otis Anderson, who was kind of that, running back / slot type. I mean, Marlon Williams caught 71 balls. Jacob Harris caught 30. Trey Nixon caught 19. I mean, that's three of their top four receivers who are gone. That's a pretty big deal for an offense that really likes chucking around. So I'm curious to see, what this thing will actually look like this year. But I still think this program has a ton of built-in advantages over the rest of the league. And I actually believe that this program's ceiling is higher than Cincinnati's ceiling if they're both operating at peak efficiency. And implied in that, I think, is that you are mining your home region and state's talent to maximum effect, given your resources, which UCF has not done.
Without a doubt. I mean, Orlando, Florida, like if they're both running at 100%, UCF is beating Cincinnati in American Athletic Conference championship games.
I mean, they're happy to have Heupel gone.
Yeah.
Like everybody I talked to. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. You got the UCF group chat.
Yeah.
Neighborhood group chat just filled with Knights. Oh, yeah. Nitro actually lives right down the street.
Nitro babysits on Fridays.
Yeah. Nitro babysits during the couples golf tournaments. That's
a friend of mine was giving my son, who's not quite 2 years old yet, some UCF branded logo golf balls, and it's like, oh, these are TPX 5s. Like these are going to go in Daddy's bag right here. And you have this, kind of scrounge bucket over here. We're not hitting these into the street.
Balls.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, speaking of programs with some built-in advantages, Boise State. 5-0 in conference play. They did take an L in the conference championship game. They end up going 5-2 overall on the season. Brian Harsin, of course, off to Auburn, and Andy Avalos comes after 2 years of being the Oregon defensive coordinator. He's a former Boise State linebacker, former Boise State assistant. And one thing that is interesting is that from some of the reports I was able to hear, pre-spring practice, early spring practice, media availability, a lot of chatter about a new vibe, all about the vibes out there. And what that means is loosening up some of the social media restrictions on players, making spring practices more available to the media, making assistants more available to the media, just really big intangible changes that seem to be going on around that Boise program, which, as we have touched on this podcast, remember we were a little bit confused to see the Boise State fan reaction to Brian Harsin leaving. You know, I think highly of Brian Harsin as a football coach. He's somebody that I consider him a plus value added type football coach, but maybe a little change in leadership, change in voice will have some positive effects on that program. Again, a program that has been performing at a very, very high level. Now, Andy Avalos, former defensive coordinator, of course, he promoted Spencer Danielson, the existing defensive line coach, to defensive coordinator, but that's the only defensive coach that still is around. Tim Plough?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Listen, I'm out here just being honest with y'all. This is, don't know it, but here's what I know. And this is, if it's Plough, we'll say,
I'm going to go with
Pluff. Tim Pluff comes from UC Davis, where at UC Davis, they ran up tempo, no huddle, very, very prolific passing attack. That's not exactly what Boise State's offense has been. So that is very interesting to me. And especially because we've got two capable quarterbacks. Hank Bachmeier has been very good, got thrown into the fire very early in his career with some positive response. And then COVID issues forced former USC quarterback Jack Sears into action for the Broncos. He looked good as well. So we've got a new offensive coordinator, new quarterbacks coach, brand new offensive scheme, and two pretty good quarterbacks. So when we're talking about some of these, interesting quarterback battles across the country, heck, I even wrote a feature on quarterback battles to watch, and I missed this one. I missed it. I think this one's really interesting. So that's probably the one big standout to me, the new offense, the two quarterbacks who I think might be right there in the mix to run it. And, Andy Avalos, just chill bro, trying to make them the chill bro Broncos. So how are we feeling about Boise State?
I think the one thing that's most interesting to me is what you brought up with Pluff, because we've talked about it with, you bring in a defensive coordinator, and a lot of the times you see defensive coordinators take over programs and they just kind of want your offense to be, complementary game management. Don't put my defense in bad positions. So it's interesting to me that Avalos takes the job and then it goes and gets a guy from the FCS level, specifically because he does run an up-tempo, very pass heavy kind of offense. And I think that is going to be interesting to see this spring, because that is obviously, it's not like Boise was, running 1935 offense, but it's still a change in what they had been doing. So that's going to be interesting to see how they can implement that along with the quarterback competition, and see if we could figure out if one of those guys is better suited for this new one. I think that means we're probably going to see a more explosive Boise offense, which I think is a good thing for them. And it's going to be interesting to see how Avalos does that with his defense and tries to pair it up, and whether he sticks with it, because that's the thing with defensive coordinators. If we get into the season and the offense is, putting the defense in a lot of bad positions, like going out there doing really quick 3-and-outs and put the defense right back out there, how long does he stick with it, or does he make the change? So that, I think, is going to be a key thing, but obviously we won't get the answer to that this spring. But I think this is a Boise State team where I have far more excitement about it, simply because things are different. Like every year going in, whether it was the Peterson era and then the Harsin era, you kind of knew what you were getting because it was going to be Boise State. So I think this year it's going to look different. So there's more excitement there. But at the same time, there's also a little bit of trepidation. It's like, well, now there's a change, and it's the program that has been so consistent for so long at this point. When you make that change, can they keep it up? Will there be a step back? So I think that as far as the spring is concerned, I'm more interested in the Boise State Broncos this spring than I probably have been in a lot of recent springs.
So Mike Leach, Joe Brady, Lane Kiffin, Norm Chow, the best defensive head coaches on the national scale are the ones who eventually let go, or even from the start, in the case of Bob Stoops, and hired an offensive coordinator who really pushed the envelope and who gave them fits. In fact, Stoops is on record of saying that when he was the defensive coordinator of the Gators in the late 90s, I wanted to hire the guy who gave me the most trouble, somebody I thought was a real pain in the ass to prepare for. And then I wanted to put that guy with really good players. And Leach at the time was Hal Mummy's OC at Kentucky. And then Stoops hired him away to go to Oklahoma. So I love this idea. Like, this is pretty cool. Now, you still have to let the guy operate, you know, and like it's one thing to hire him. It's another thing to actually let him do his thing. And, you know, in the game, when you're already down 10 points, 20 minutes into the game, are you still letting him go up tempo? But if you hire him and you believe in it, and you say, hey, my job as the head coach and as defensive coordinator is to, you know, get stops, to be a really great defense, even if we get some short fields or if we have to face 14, 15 possessions a game. I think we can do that because we're Boise State. We're going to have better players than the rest of the league. And so, hell, we'd love to play 20 possessions a game. Cool. Our depth is better than yours. Eventually, our backups will kick the heck out of your backups, right? I mean, that's, to me, that all makes sense. I think the quarterback competition is interesting because Bachmeier, you know, he had some injury stuff, and he was fine, but he wasn't amazing last year, right? But he also has shown some real flashes of brilliance, and you know they get Khalil Shakir back. I think this should be a really good team, and in my opinion, is the clear favorite in this league,
without a doubt. The Houston Cougars wrapping things up here, kind of disappointing, but again, Houston's just another team where, given the player availability issues, the ups and downs of the season, I don't know. It's gonna look a little strange, but 3-3 against conference opponents, 3-5 overall. Clayton Tune is back, but is Clayton Tune the dude? We got a couple of options there that might push in for playing time. I think the offensive line last year we saw really miss the likes of Josh Jones and Jared Williams because the offensive line was bad. We are also this year on the defensive side of the ball looking to replace Peyton Turner, a 3-year starter on that defensive line who's a really, really good player. He is going to be missed. This is the first year after, you know, Dana Holgorsen comes and there's the whole red shirting. We're trying to tank and we're trying to reload the roster. Well, this year 3, like this is whatever the roster is a reflection of you as a head coach. So what are we looking at this spring for a Houston team that has yet to, outside of like very, very specific like blips throughout these 2 seasons with Dana Holgorsen, has yet to really recapture what we believe to be that program ceiling?
Yeah, this is, like you said, this is Dana's 3rd year at Houston, and I still don't know what the hell Dana's Houston is supposed to be. And some of that was in control, like the whole red shirting stuff, you know, during his first season, but then out of control last year when they had so many games postponed because of COVID that they had to push back, and their entire season was so disrupted. So in a way, this is kind of like year 1 for the Cougars under Dana Holgorsen, where we finally get an idea of what the plan is and what the approach is going to be and how things are supposed to work. Because like their first 3 games were all postponed last year. They finally get out against Tulane, and they were surprisingly, they played pretty well in that Tulane game, considering all the circumstances. They won the game. Then they lost. They got crushed by BYU. And I feel like that was kind of a theme. If you look at their wins, they beat Tulane, they beat Navy, which wasn't a great Navy team last year, and they beat up on a bad USF team. But in their losses, they got crushed by BYU. They got crushed by UCF. They got crushed by Cincinnati. They lost close to Memphis, and they lost to Hawaii by 2 scores in the bowl game. So just based on the results, my feeling is there's still quite a bit of work left to be done here for Dana. And I feel like going into this 3rd season, I don't know if the school's going to be approaching it as a year 1 situation. So I do think that this is a very important spring for them to get things in order, to get things figured out and get the game plan together for what might be their first legitimate season together as head coach and roster.
Okay, I found it. Cool. I was looking for this quote. So Houston president Ranu Kador, this is back in 2016. She's on record as saying the winning is defined at University of Houston as 10-2. She told faculty and staff at an annual holiday party at her home. I'm reading from an SB Nation article here by Stephen Godfrey. We fire coaches at 8-4 at Houston. I mean, that's pretty interesting.
Cut and dry.
Yeah. This team is so hard for me to read.
Yeah.
And they got in a lot of games, but like something I notice here, just when I'm looking at their sheet, I don't think you could find me any team in the country that played 8 games. 4 of the games, they had a 90+% win expectancy. The other 4, they were single digits or 0. This is crazy. And it was like, it was like ping pong. I mean, 100% against Tulane, 7% against BYU, 89% against Navy, 0% against UCF, 0% Cincinnati, 100% USF, 93% Memphis, 6% rather against Hawaii. Like, there was nothing, there was no in between. They were either really pretty damn good or just didn't show up. I don't know how to read that. I think tune is fine, but like, is there something else going on there? And I don't want to suggest cultural issues or anything, but like that's strange. And I don't know, man, I'm having a hard time reading this team as to what this is. And I think this is one of those things that, hell, does this staff even know what they have? Maybe they do.
And listen, if there's a coaching change at Houston, would you be surprised?
No.
Because I
don't know what the buyout is, but probably not.
I mean, there's too many other, like, not only are there no like answers, not only are we uncertain about what we're looking at, but there's not a lot of vertical movement. Like if you don't have your act together, then you're just going to flounder in the middle of this conference. Right?
Yeah. And if you look at like their schedule this year isn't terrible. So maybe there's a chance for some improvement because they open with Texas Tech, and I don't know that they're in a position to win that game, but they get Rice, they get Grambling. They could be 3-0, not inconceivably going into conference play. So I don't know. I think it's funny. I put them on when we were discussing teams to talk. I sent Houston on the list, and I immediately thought to myself, I shouldn't have included Houston because I literally have.
Because I don't know anything.
What the hell's going to happen with that team?
I mean, even as I dug around, I found a lot of shrugs. So I mean, that's
because that's the thing too. Like all Houston media has been covering right now is the basketball team, so there's really not a whole lot to fuck on the football team right now either.
Yeah, but I mean, it's Dana Holgorsen, so he's what if this flames out, or if it jumps, or if it spikes, or if they continue to ping pong, they will at least be of interest. That is without a doubt. Reminder: if your favorite team does not have a spring gleaning, you can put it in the mailbag, put in a request. We'll put in a spring gleaning special segment in a future mailbag episode. We've got the mailbag coming up next. So make sure that you go and drop in a question to the big old bag of mail. You can follow him on Twitter at BudElliott3. You can follow him at Tom Fernelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.